A very good afternoon to one and all. Allow me to welcome you to this event on midterm progress reports and national mechanism for the follow-up of UPR recommendation, which is co-hosted by the permanent missions of the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Morocco, and in partnership with the permanent missions of Finland, Mauritius, Mexico, Thailand, UPR, Office of High Commissioner for Human Rights, UPR Info, and the Universal Rights Group. As indicated on my nameplate, my name is Subhash Kachador. I'm the director of the Universal Rights Group, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. As many of you are aware, the Universal Periodic Review is one of the main mechanisms and key innovations of the Human Rights Council. It was set up in 2006 to assess on a regular basis the human rights situation in each of the 193 member states of the United Nations and how these states fulfill their human rights obligations and commitment. So far, the UPR has proved to be a successful mechanism in terms of engagement of states on very many occasions at ministerial level on this process. We are gratified today to have the presence of Excellencies Baroness Anelay, Minister of State in charge of Human Rights and International Organization of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office of the United Kingdom, and His Excellency Mr. Mahjoub Haiba, Inter-Ministerial Delegate for Human Rights of the Kingdom of Morocco, who both will be co-chairing this event, together with eminent ambassadors, the Office of the High Commissioner, and also civil society representative. Our program will start with some introductory remarks by Mr. Bacre and Ndiaye, the Director of Human Rights Council and Special Procedures Division, which then will be followed by the two co-chairs, Her Excellency Baroness Anelay and His Excellency Mr. Mahjoub Haiba, will give us an expose of the experience of their country in the terms of preparation of the midterm report for the implementation of UPR recommendation, as well as the national mechanism that has been set up in that respect. We shall then hear 5 minutes intervention from Her Excellency Mrs. Päivi Kairamo, who is on her way actually, Ambassador of Finland, followed by His Excellency Mr. Dhalladoo, Ambassador of Mauritius, His Excellency Mr. Roekchamnong, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Thailand, Mr. Ricardo Iguiniz, Director General of Human Rights Policy, Ministry of Interior, Mexico, and finally Mr. Roland Chauville from UPR Info. So without much ado, I will pass the floor to Mr. Ndiaye for some introductory remarks for today's event. Mr. Ndiaye, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le modérateur, Madame le ministre, Excellences, collègues et chers amis. It is my pleasure to open this side event aimed at discussing one of the key aspects against which the success of the UPR will be assessed: the implementation of UPR recommendation and the follow-up to previous reviews. My gratitude goes to the co-organizer of this event, the Permanent Mission of Morocco and the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, as well as to their partners and guests for this very welcome initiative. There is no doubt that the UPR has proven to be a transparent, collaborative mechanism for change which takes a broad and holistic approach. It has been a learning tool for all, providing an opportunity for self-improvement in a constructive spirit. It has strengthened the notion of the universality of human rights, while at the national level providing the framework for institutional collaboration across state structures, as well as between state and civil society, through consultations for the preparation of the national report, the definition of a national human rights agenda, and cooperation in the follow-up phase. Having said this, there has always been appreciation of the fact that non-implementation of recommendation would put at risk the relevance of the process. Thus, one real basis on which the full success of the UPR will be judged is on how it has led to positive and concrete improvement of the human rights situation in every country. Dear colleagues and friends, let me use this informal and friendly setting to identify some of the key elements of effective follow-up measures taken by states and appropriate reporting on them. My starting point would be paragraph 34 of Resolution 5.1, which states, I quote, the subsequent review should focus inter alia on the implementation of the preceding outcome. End of quote. The Office of the High Commissioner considers it as of utmost importance that all actors involved in the UPR process understand and consider the periodicity of reviews as a way to reflect continuity from one cycle to another. Each review should build on the previous one and shed light on the changes that occur since by providing information on the implementation status of the recommendation of the preceding cycles. Indeed, the UPR cannot be seen as starting and ending a few months around the UPR working group meeting, but it must be seen as a national continuing process. This requirement has undoubtedly a number of implications for the state in the way in which the UPR information is compiled, analyzed, processed, and shared at national level. States have, therefore, the challenge of effectively reflecting this aspect in their national report and during the interview. A standing national interinstitutional structure mandated to lead the follow-up process for which we advocate has proven to be a prerequisite to ensure an effective continuity through the 4.5-year national process when endowed with the adequate capacity at the technical and decision-making levels. There must be an engagement and commitment of line ministries to follow up on UPR recommendations. Based on experience of various countries, a holistic approach bringing together obligation and commitments flowing from other human rights mechanisms has proven most useful. Moreover, the adoption of a national action plan based on prioritized and thematically clustered recommendations with clear responsibilities and timeframes is seen as indispensable for effective and nationally owned follow-up. Such a structure and process do not require significant human and financial resources, but clear and sustained political will and commitment. Another key element relates to the effective implementation and monitoring of the National Action Plan, which could be carried out through the use of relevant indicators, the presentation of regular oral updates in the agenda item 6 of the Human Rights Council, and the submission of periodic reports, also called midterm reports. Some countries have found it useful to create national databases to facilitate the sharing of information and tracking of implementation of the many recommendations received with appropriate indicators to ensure that there is real impact. By securing a space for regular discussion on UPR issues at each of its 3-yearly sessions, in addition to the UPR segment, for the adoption of the outcome documents, the Human Rights Council is reinforcing the importance of regular monitoring and reporting on progress on UPR implementation and follow-up. It is offering the possibility for states to regularly update the international community on the progress made and challenges being faced since their previous review. The submission of midterm reports is also a welcome growing practice. So far, 49 states have submitted such a report. These are extremely useful tools, not only for the international community to be appraised of the status of implementation of recommendations, but more importantly at the national level, as this allows the stakeholders and the state to keep an open dialogue on the human rights agenda on the ground and facilitate the process for the preparation for the subsequent reviews. Excellencies, colleagues and friends, the UPR must be clearly nationally owned. But at the same time, I hope that you will find in OSCHR, and I'm glad to welcome to this meeting Shahrazad Kasbah, who is the new chief of our UPR branch, as you know, and with all the colleagues from the UPR team, because it's really a teamwork. We'll find in the OSCHR then a supportive partner where appropriate and requested, and you engage on follow-up implementation work. In countries where it has an operational presence, the office is supporting the implementation by state institutions of recommendations from the UPR and other mechanisms as part of our own priority work in support of states. Moreover, in view of its limited resources and limited operational presences at country level, we are increasingly engaging with the United Nations system in supporting an integration of the recommendation into their respective country programs in support of states, in line with the respective mandate of the various United Nations country team members. We are now almost in the middle of the second cycle, and soon we'll be again engaged in assessing its success and shortcomings, and embarking into the third cycle. The future of an effective, action-oriented, concrete, change-provoking mechanism largely depends on the success and positive assessment of the current cycle. Whether or not we will have a meaningful third and subsequent cycle is being determined now. With these words, let me know now, please, to our panelists for some good practice in regard to the effective follow-up. And before thanking you for that, I have to express a regret, because last time the UK and Morocco organized a UPR meeting, it was in a different setting. It was on the lake, on a very nice boat. And I hope that next time the crisis will be over and we'll have again another good boat tour while discussing the UPR. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ndiaye for his opening remarks, and I take on board what is said about the venue. Clearly, I've got to hire a very big cruise ship, and I am delighted at the response today, those attending. I was very impressed by the way, Mr. Ndiaye, you concentrated in your opening remarks on the three themes, that this is a constructive debate in the UPR, but it's an ongoing one. It doesn't just finish at any one point in time. It's a continuing discussion. And also that it's a process where it needs political will. And I know that I can say that my colleague and I in Morocco give that political will. I'd like to thank my Moroccan counterpart for making this event possible. For me, it's a very important opportunity at the beginning of my ministerial career in this particular field of human rights. Our meeting today builds on our bilateral cooperation, which has included working with Moroccan government and civil society to encourage greater political participation, including by women and young people. And we've worked together to strengthen government transparency and fight corruption, to support media and government communications and enable a democratic debate. British and Moroccan ministers have frequent contact on a wide range of political issues, including political reform and human rights. And we, of course, cooperate in international forums, including the United Nations. It was therefore perhaps natural that the United Kingdom and Morocco would work together on a number of initiatives to share best practice on the UPR process, and I very much welcome that partnership. The UK has a long history of recognising rights. On the 15th of June next year, 2015, in our country we will celebrate the 800th anniversary of the Magna Carta. Magna Carta was the first general statement of rights in England, and the 3 clauses remain in force today, all these years later. One defends the freedom and rights of the English Church, another confirms the liberties and customs of London and other towns, but the third, the Golden Passage, is the most famous. It decrees as follows: "No free man shall be seized or imprisoned, or stripped of his rights or possessions, or outlawed, or exiled, nor will we proceed with force against him, except by the lawful judgment of his equals, or by the law of the land. To no one will we sell, to no one deny, or delay right or justice." Strong words at a time of great conflict all those years ago, but it can be seen as establishing the idea of the due process of law, a principle seen as fundamental throughout the free world today. Its ideas appeared later in the American Bill of Rights and in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So the UK has a long-standing commitment to advancing human rights internationally, and we made a commitment to keeping human rights at the very core of our United Nations work during our successful campaign for membership of the United Nations Human Rights Council here. Membership of this council is, of course, an honour and a great responsibility. We very much hope to be able to continue as a member through election to the council in 2016. Our view of the Universal Periodic Review is that it's an essential mechanism for promoting continual improvement of human rights in practice. We believe this applies just as much to ourselves as to other countries. With the 3rd cycle of the UPR on the horizon, I hope you will share my ambition to strengthen and improve this mechanism. To do so, we will need to ensure that recommendations are indeed constructive and precise and serve to strengthen the protection and promotion of human rights. I'd also like to encourage other countries to submit a mid-term report on their UPR. It's been an invaluable process. In 2012, at our 2nd UPR, the UK accepted 91 recommendations in full or part out of 132. At the adoption of our report in the Council, we committed then to providing this mid-term report on the accepted recommendations and to follow up on the concerns expressed by civil society. We'd already submitted a mid-term report during our first UPR cycle, and we'd found this a valuable way to track progress and look at where we needed to make more effort. The UK's Justice Minister, Tom Anelay, has been referred to earlier today at the previous meetings, that our Justice Minister led on our review and on our mid-term report. This matters because domestic government ministries are responsible for implementing our UPR recommendations in UK, making it fact, and where legislation is required, making that legislation happen. One of the points we most value in the UPR process is that it gives us an opportunity for an open and collaborative approach with civil society and domestic human rights institutions. And indeed, this guided the way in which we went about producing this mid-term report. We wanted to make sure people and organisations across the whole of the United Kingdom felt involved, felt their voices were heard. So we attended events in England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, across the United Kingdom, Northern Ireland. and we consulted civil society organisations widely and our national human rights institutions. We also ran an online submissions process as well, which was very fruitful. We asked people to identify the key issues across the 132 recommendations. The response, perhaps not surprisingly, was that all were important, because they're all important to somebody, and most of them important to everyone. But we also identified new areas of interest throughout that consultation process. As a result, our mid-term report covers all 132 recommendations, whether we accepted them or not. And while the UK's position on many recommendations hasn't changed significantly since our examination in 2012, we have changed our position to full support on two matters. First of all, on the recommendation in tackling caste discrimination, and there is a process by which there will be consultation and draft proposals produced later this year. And also we have taken up the matter of investigating allegations against the UK armed forces. And some of that, just part of that, is being addressed at the moment by legislation which is in my own chamber, the House of Lords. So our report captures new areas identified by civil society, including the rights of older persons, of which I know there's been much debate in this Council. Copies of our mid-term report are of course available here for your reference. So may I say in conclusion that the United Kingdom believes that conducting a mid-term report is an example of best practice. It gives us the opportunity to chart our progress against the UPR, flag up achievements, but also crucially identify those areas where we still have work to do. Much of the success was due to our open and consultative approach. We listened and responded to requests for more information on what we're doing in particular areas. So I very much welcome the opportunity to share with you today our experiences, but to reiterate our commitment for the UPR. We learnt a lot through the process, and also from Morocco's experience, and we look forward to learning more as other countries start to conduct their mid-term reports. Earlier on I said there has to be political will. I have the political will to listen, and I shall. When I have to leave a little later, my deputy Rob Fenn will be here to continue to listen. And I'm also always known for making sure that when I've heard, I take what action I can.
Thank you, Excellency. Now, j'ai l'honneur de passer la parole à son Excellence M. Mahjoub Al-Haiba, délégué interministériel, pour donner l'exposé du Maroc. Yes.
Thank you very much indeed. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, it is both a pleasure and a delight for me to take part in this event with Excellency Baroness. As you know, Excellency, the United Kingdom and the Kingdom of Morocco have worked very closely on this initiative. I would like also to welcome my friend Ndiaye from the Office of High Commissioner on Human Rights and the representatives of Mexico, Mauritius, Finland, Thailand, which have since the beginning lent their support for this event by coming and sharing their valuable national experiences. A special word of gratitude goes to the Universal Rights Group and UPR Info, who have worked tirelessly to make today's meeting possible. I would like to recall that we have organized, as you mentioned, Mr. Ndiaye, organized a roundtable on the UPR and its evaluation on May 3rd, 2013, on the sidelines of the 60th session of the working group on the UPR. This event was organized, as you mentioned, outside the Palais des Nations in order to attract maximum attention and ensure wider participation of course, ambassadors and other stakeholders. We open a pertinent suggestion by your country, Excellency. We choose to organize this event in about as a part of cruise in the lake, Geneva Lake, which gave it a special tone as the symbolism of the movement goes hand in hand with the UPR mechanism, which since its launch has set states in a sort of cruise that continues to deliver and reveal aspects that were hardly considered at the beginning of the process in terms of commitments to human rights, particularly mainly in the ground. This aspect has repeatedly been underlined by the various participants in this side event. This second event that we organize today is once again an illustration of the fruitful cooperation between the two kingdoms. By organizing this second event, the two kingdoms want to emphasize that they remain strong supporters of the whole process. Sharing experiences absolutely helps achieve progress. I would like to seize this opportunity to recall the role played by my country since the creation of the UPR mechanism as a facilitator for the implementation of the UPR mechanism during the institutional building phase of the Human Rights Council in 2006 and 2007, and then again as a facilitator for the assessment of the functioning of the mechanism at the end of the first cycle in 2011. Morocco's experience in this area focuses on the fact that the UPR appears to be a process. It's a tool, it's a mechanism, but it's mainly a process in the sense that this mechanism requires an entire phase for the elaboration of the national report, then the review itself before the Human Rights Council, but also and especially implementation of the recommendation of this mechanism. As such, I want to remind you that in May 2012, as part of the second cycle, Morocco committed itself on a voluntary basis to present midterm review and adopted shortly after the review a national action plan on the implementation of the recommendation of the UPR, taking account the recommendation issued by the whole UN mechanisms, mainly the treaty bodies and special procedures. The elaboration of this action plan was an opportunity for Morocco to create various pathways between all stakeholders, public authorities, civil society, the media, and even the university, and promote full understanding of this mechanism at the national level by the all stakeholders. And as you mentioned, Excellency, that needs requires to go to the whole territory to allow the different stakeholders, and mainly women. And let me recall what Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt said at the end of the drafting of the process of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. She said, "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." And I think we are in a great process. So the dreams are now being translated in reality, that there are many challenges. Allow me for a short time to switch from English to Arabic. إذن فيما يتعلق بهذا الموضوع، وأعتقد أن في حديث الذي سبقني الأهم هو أن هذه الآلية، آلية الاستعراض الدوري الشامل، هي يعني مسار لحقوق الإنسان جديد، وربما بالنسبة لآليات الأمم المتحدة كلها هذا هو المسار الذي يجمع كل قضايا حقوق الإنسان، ولكن أهم من ذلك ينبغي أن يجمع كل الأطراف المعنية. ولكن بما أننا الآن في مسار تتعدد فيه الآليات وتتعدد فيه التوصيات، فينبغي لمواجهة هذا التعدد أن نعمل على متابعة تنفيذ توصيات الاستعراض الدوري الشامل والتوصيات الصادرة عن آليات الأمم المتحدة الأخرى، هيئات المعاهدات والإجراءات الخاصة وفق تخطيط استراتيجي. وهذا ما انخرطت فيه المملكة المغربية باعتماد خطة وطنية لمتابعة تنفيذ التوصيات الصادرة عن الاستعراض الدوري الشامل، وقمنا بذلك مباشرة بعد استعراضنا في الدور الثاني هنا بجنيف، وذلك بدعم من منظومة الأمم المتحدة المعتمدة بالرباط، وأيضا من طرف المكتب الإقليمي لمكتب المفوضية السامية لحقوق الإنسان ببيروت. الآن نحن في مسار لأن نعتبر حتى التقرير المرحلي الميد ريبورت، حتى التقرير المرحلي ليس يعني هدفا في حد ذاته، ولكنه ينبغي أن يبقى مستمرا فيما يتعلق بتنقيحه وفيما يتعلق بتطويره. العنصر الثاني والأخير الذي أريد أن أضيف هو أنه بالإضافة إلى التخطيط الاستراتيجي ينبغي أيضا أن نطور آليات التنسيق بين الوزارية لكي تكون مكلفة ليس فقط بإعداد التقرير، ولكن بمناسبة إعداد التقرير أن تعمل على فتح حوارات وطنية واسعة حول المواضيع التي تدخل ضمن توصيات الاستعراض الدوري الشامل. وهنا استوحينا فكرة ربما استبقنا الأمور، وهو التوصية التي وردت في تقرير السيدة بيلاي المفوضة السامية السابقة في المسار الذي ابتدأته منذ 2009 حول تعزيز نظام هيئات المعاهدات، والذي أوصت فيه الدول بخلق ما سمته بستاندينج Inter-Ministerial mechanisms، أي آليات وزارية مختلطة لمتابعة التقارير وفتح حوارات، وبالخصوص حفظ الذاكرة institutional memory، الذاكرة المؤسساتية، لأن أحيانا نقدم التقارير ونقوم بنشرها ولكن ننسى مسألة الأرشفة ومسألة حفظ الذاكرة المؤسساتية. وأخيرا لا بد من التركيز على دور الجامعة، على دور المحافل الأكاديمية، وهذا ما صارت فيه المملكة المغربية خلال إعداد التقرير الوطني بالنسبة للاستعراض في الدور الثاني وبالنسبة لإعداد هذا التقرير المرحلي. شكرا.
Thank you very much, Excellency. What we gather from our two co-chairs, like the UPR is a partnership at the national level with all stakeholders, as the Excellency has explained, with the civil society and everyone which is involved in advancement of human rights, but also a partnership between countries from northern and southern hemisphere at the bilateral but also international level to advance the situation of human rights on the ground. I shall now invite Her Excellency Mrs. Päivi Kairamo, Ambassador and Representative of Finland, to take the floor for her 5 minutes intervention. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and my apologies for being late. Unfortunately, there are many activities going on. But allow me, Mr. Chairman, to present our experiences, and I would start, by saying that this kind of event is very important for us. UPR is a very important tool and a means for cooperation for us. So we are very, very proud to be part of this event. Thank you very much for that. For my own country, I would like to inform you that in June this year, Finland submitted to the Human Rights Council its voluntary midterm follow-up report on the implementation of the recommendations received during our second Universal Periodic Review in May 2012. Our midterm report includes an annex containing a separate submission by the Finnish Human Rights Center, which is an autonomous and independent national human rights institution, and it began its work in the spring of 2012. For us, the UPR provides an important channel to elaborate on national achievements and challenges in the field of human rights in a constructive and equal manner based on a true dialogue between member states. Again, for us, the UPR is not only an interactive peer assessment, it is also a peer learning process. It provides us with a variety of tools for promoting human rights based on a continued bilateral as well as multilateral dialogue. The UPR process has so far been a very positive experience for my country. An active role of civil society has largely contributed to it, we feel. Based on our own experience, a well-functioning civil society is an essential part of the necessary infrastructure for implementing human rights and fundamental freedoms. During the past couple of years, we have made significant changes in the national monitoring and implementation system of human rights. I already referred to the Independent Human Rights Center, which is, by the way, established by law. And as I mentioned, it worked 2 years ago. In addition, human rights cooperation between the ministries has increased through the collaboration pursued under the government network of contact persons for fundamental and human rights, consisting of representatives of all ministries and the supreme guardians of the law. One of the tasks of the network is to examine the implementation of Finland's human rights obligations and commitments and the period reporting associated with them. Actually, Mr. Chairman, this is, my introduction at this stage, and willing to engage in further dialogue.
Thank you very much, His Excellency, for being concise and up to the point. I shall now invite His Excellency Ambassador Dhalladoo, Permanent Representative of Mauritius, to present the case of Mauritius in terms of preparation of midterm report and implementation of UPR recommendation. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Excellencies the Baroness, Honorable Minister from Morocco, Mr. Ndiaye, colleagues, ambassadors, and distinguished members of the delegation. I am pleased to be associated with this very important side event, and my delegation is honored by the presence of high dignitaries on the panel and to benefit from their very insightful presentation. The government of Mauritius gives highest priority to the promotion and protection of human rights, and it is the Prime Minister's office that coordinates human rights issues, including the UPR for Mauritius. What we are seeking to address in this side event is the follow-up to the UPR review. We in Mauritius view this as a continuous and sustained process, starting with our initial review exercise and its recommendation, the ongoing preparation for the voluntary midterm report, and the national report leading to our review to the next cycle. The national process is not limited just to preparing reports, but it also involves ensuring effective implementation of the recommendation by initiating necessary actions and reforms, updating legal frameworks, enacting enabling legislation, putting in place the right monitoring mechanism, and carrying out regular consultation for sustained outcomes. The outcomes eventually are translated into concrete elements for our midterm and national reports. Mauritius was first UPR'd in February 2009 and received 44 recommendations. They were accepted in total. We submitted the midterm report in 2011. Mauritius was in fact the first African country to do so. Mauritius was reviewed for a second time in October 2013, and during the adoption of our report by the Council in March this year, we made a pledge to submit our second voluntary report. We have set up two main mechanisms, namely the Human Rights Unit within the Prime Minister's office, which is responsible to coordinate all human rights issues, and a Human Rights Monitoring Committee, which is responsible for the implementation of the UPR recommendation. The Human Rights Monitoring Committee is comprised of various ministries and departments, national human rights institutions, the ombudspersons, the civil service representatives and NGOs, including the trade unions. The monitoring committee also oversees the implementation of other human rights reviews conducted at regional level and by the treaty bodies. We are fully aware that the outcomes of the review should be implemented primarily by the state, but we recognize the importance of broad consultation with all stakeholders with a view to building ownership for the implementation process. So regular meetings are conducted by the Human Rights Monitoring Committee to assess outcomes and the impact of the accepted recommendations. We disseminate human rights issues to the larger public through workshops, seminars on UPR process, awareness campaign on UPR in the local language on national television. We use the ICT tools, namely the net, email, media, to reach out widely on human rights issues. We have human rights education at primary, secondary, and tertiary levels, and also we use press briefing and conferences. Mauritius adopted a National Action Plan for 2012 to 2020 after extensive national consultation process to improve the human rights situation in line with international best practices, and the Human Rights Monitoring Committee monitors its implementation. Mauritius also has a national action plans to combat domestic violence and to end gender-based violence. To monitor progress on the recommendation of the action plan, a database on human rights indicators have been established with the help of the UNDP and the University of Mauritius. In July 2013, Mauritius, in collaboration with the OHCR, hosted an inter-regional seminar to support the participation of LDCs and SIDs in the work of human rights and the UPR mechanism. We have also approached the OHCR for technical assistance for training of trainers program in order to constitute a pool of resource person for the training and sensitizing of the citizens on human rights issues. I shall now dwell briefly on some challenges and constraints from a general perspective. Going by the number of recommendations Mauritius received during the second review, and which have increased fourfold than what we received in the first review, there might be a perception that our human rights records have not improved or utterly worse off, though it is not really the case. There is need to make recommendations which are clear and implementable, and to limit to a maximum of 2 recommendations per state as spelled out previously in the Council in a cross-regional statement. The implementation of UPR recommendation is not a one-time quick fixed action, but a long process that may take some years. However, it is noted that some recommendations which are still in the process of implementation since the first review have been reformulated in the second review. There is need to respect national, cultural, religious value systems as well as particularities of a state under review while making recommendations. Otherwise, recommendations which do not heed such sensitivities may remain a dead letter for years. Some UPR recommendations are just repetition or similar to those made or accepted in the review of treaty bodies. Such recommendations should be avoided as they are being addressed under other fora of framework. If we make a recommendation, we should be in a position to offer our best practices or experiences of how to realize it. We find it unfair sometimes that some delegations some recommendations are made by certain members who themselves have not implemented them. The moral ground for making such recommendation is questionable. Mauritius fully understands the financial constraints faced by developing countries in sending delegations to Human Rights Council for the UPR review. It was in this spirit that we supported the establishment of a voluntary trust fund to assist LDCs and states in participating in the work of Human Rights Council and its UPR mechanism. In closing, let me point out that developing countries need capacity building and technical assistance to implement effectively the UPR recommendation. We feel that there is a need to organize a side event on this issue so that we don't only make recommendations in the UPR but also consider facilitating their implementation. Thank you for the attention.
Thank you, Excellency, and thank you for outlining also the challenges which, as a small island developing country, face in the implementation of UPR recommendation. I shall now pass the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Krekpan Roekchamnong, Ambassador and Deputy Permanent Representative of Thailand.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First and foremost, allow me to welcome to Geneva, Her Excellency Madame Baroness Anelay, Minister of State of Human Rights International Organization, as well as His Excellency Mahjoub, Haiba, Inter-Ministerial Delegate of Human Rights from the Kingdom of Morocco. I also would like to extend my thanks to the government missions of Morocco and the UK for organizing this side event on the UPR best practices, and of course for the invitation extended to Thailand to share our experiences on the UPR process. Thailand attaches high importance to the UPR mechanism. UPR is the most effective tool to help promote and protect human rights and improve the lives and well-being of the people on the ground. As for my presentation, I have divided into 4 stages, which will be touching upon Thailand's approach in the UPR process. Secondly, the national mechanism on the follow-up. Third, midterm update and the preparations for the second cycles. Fourth, lesson learned. On Thailand's approach to the UPR process, I wish to share our experiences in the UPR process, which was drawn from the first cycle review. We have presented our UPR report at the 12th session of the UPR working group in October 2011. And it was subsequently adopted at the 19th session of the HRC in March session in 2012. We strongly believe that the process is no less important than the outcome of the implementation. And in order to ensure effective implementation, the process itself has to be as inclusive as possible by including all relevant stakeholders. As a result, Thailand has been pursuing a whole of government and a whole of society approach to our UPR process right from the beginning. In the preparations of our UPR report, a national UPR committee was set up with participation from all relevant agencies and human rights experts. Broad-based national consultations were organized nationwide. We also engaged our National Human Rights Commission and civil society in the process. During our review, we received 172 recommendations, out of which 100 we accepted immediately. We took back 72 recommendations, and we came back by accepting it, additional 34 recommendations in whole and in part, bringing a total of 134 recommendations accepted by Thailand. We also made 8 voluntary pledges which were in line with the concern raised by the public and the civil society organization during our consultative process. Among those are pledges on the standing invitation to all the special procedure mandate holders. On the national mechanism for the follow-up, after the first cycle review, mandates of our National UPR Committee was adjusted to focus on the implementing recommendations and pledges, in addition to preparing the midterm and second UPR report. A national action plan was developed in 2013 outlining specific activities and time frame for effective and timely implementation of our accepted recommendations and voluntary pledges. Moreover, we are trying to incorporate the recommendations and the pledges into our third National Human Rights Plan 2014 up to 2018, which is currently awaiting approval by Cabinet. As for the midterm update and the preparations for the second cycle review, we are preparing for the second cycle review in mid-2016. Thailand voluntarily participated in the midterm update and self-assessment and follow-up process at the national level. We hope that this activity would eventually become the permanent feature of the UPR process. On the lesson learned, allow me to share some of the challenges and key lessons we have learned in our implementations and recommendations and pledges. First, we need political will, which is at the top of the agenda and is absolutely necessary to drive the whole of the government and the whole of the society approach towards implementation. Secondly, inclusiveness. This is the key to success in the UPR process. We have sought to reach out to all segments of the society and all actors, be they government agencies, academia, NGOs, local authorities, students, and the general public. It was also important to reach out parliamentarians as many recommendations need law amendments which would require the support. Third, transparency. To demonstrate good faith and goodwill for government agencies in making changes by allowing the public to closely follow up and monitor the implementation of accepted recommendations and pledges. During the 19th session of Human Rights Council, we have brought a large representation from the civil society to be here in Geneva during the council. Fourth, importantly, is the public awareness. To keep raising public awareness about the importance of the protections and promotions of human rights and the UPR process, so that our members of the society could effectively participate and constructively contribute to the national consultative process and follow-up. Fifth, we found that at the end of the first UPR cycle, some recommendations were too broad. We should work to ensure future recommendations will be more practical and implementable. Last, six, capacity building. We see to it it's crucial to ensure effective implementation. So that's why Thailand has proposed an annual resolutions on the technical operations and capacity building of the Human Rights Council, including the current session. So this is where I end my presentation and looking forward for your active engagement and participation in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Excellency. And I think one point that we take in it, which hasn't been, is the issue of political will. This is very important in terms of the national coordinating mechanism to work, but also in terms of implementation. I shall now pass the floor to Mr. Ricardo Iguiniz, Director General of the Public Human Rights Policy of the Ministry of Interior of Mexico. So, Ricardo, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Welcome to this important dialogue. First of all, let me introduce myself. I am Ricardo Sepulveda, the General Director of Human Rights Policy in the Mexican Interior Ministry. This office in Mexico is in charge of defining human rights policies and implementing international recommendations at the state level. Actually, this office prepared Mexico's second UPR in coordination, of course, with the Mexico Foreign Affairs Ministry. I would like to give my thanks and remark our consideration to the United Kingdom and to the Kingdom of Morocco for inviting us to discuss the importance of reinforcing the UPR process. We consider it a very effective mechanism that will improve the state's internal human rights policies. In that sense, Mexico has organized our different mechanisms and processes to consolidate a national human rights policy that ensures our people the opportunity to freely exercise their human rights in our country. Mexico has assumed the compromise of consolidating a human rights policy as one of the main components that will promote a democratic development for our country in the following years. And UPR recommendations have absolutely contributed to guide this policy. For that purpose, Mexico adopted our National Action Plan as an instrument that could help us accomplish these objectives, according to a recommendation that we know was formulated under the 1993 Vienna Declaration and Action Program. In fact, today Mexico is one of the few states that has prepared and issued 4 national action plans that were implemented in the past 15 years since 1998. This work, by the way, have been done with the support of the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights. The program, the national program, is the main instrument that moves our policies forward, and it includes the state's commitment to creating an independent mechanism to measure human rights progress. According to the issue of this meeting, the second UPR examination of our country before the Human Rights Council occurred as we were actually preparing our national plan for 2013-2018. And this provided us with the opportunity to incorporate the UPR recommendations as guidelines for defining the plan strategies and actions. And we consider the integration of the UPR recommendations at the state level to be one of the key strategies to reinforce domestic human rights policies and follow up their recommendations. On another level, I would like to point out that during all the UPR recommendation process, including the preparation of the initial report and the final response as well, we invited all civil society organizations to participate so they could provide us with their opinion, proposals, and any other type of information they consider important. On this point, I would like to highlight the interest and confidence civil society organizations have shown for the UPR process. Mexico's human rights authorities believe that our civil groups did engage in important follow-up work related to the final recommendations. In that sense, the UPR is providing us a very constructive opportunity for the government, for the state, to promote a productive dialogue between government and civil society. Mexican civil organizations believe in the UPR, and that gives us a very clear agenda on how to move forward. Regarding the follow-up strategies and mechanisms, I would like to mention and to share with you that since 2003, Mexico created an Inter-Ministerial Commission on Government Policy on Human Rights. This body is responsible for coordinating the human rights planning processes at the various federal government offices and bodies. In this case, the chair corresponds to the Interior Minister, and the vice chair is held by the representative from the Foreign Affairs Ministry. In this moment, after more than 10 years of existence of this Inter-Ministerial Commission, the Commission coordinates the work of 53 areas and units of the federal administration, integrated in the 17 different ministries. We believe that this is the adequate space to conduct follow-up work for the UPR, as well as treaty bodies' recommendations as a whole processes. However, we are trying to better coordinate with all the different ministries. Due to the transversal nature of human rights policies, we are facing the challenge of how to incorporate all government sectors in the process. This means that we have to extend participation in policy deliberations to, of course, our Congress, the Supreme Court, and the different 32 local governments. However, I consider that our major challenges come from the elaboration of precise and adequate indicators that can really provide us with measurable data that help us to draft periodic advances reports. As is the case in many other countries, we face the problem that many recommendations are worded so generally. It is difficult to formulate public policies that respond adequately. To conclude this part of my presentations, of course, we are so interested in sharing and dialoguing with you different experiences. I would like to highlight the following points. Mexico is working on presenting a midterm report, actually, considering that it will help the country to promote the internal human rights policies, to reinforce and accelerate the advances. In this process, we are involving all the entities at the federal and the local level. Mexico is committed to continue working with civil society to accompany the government in the entire UPR implementation process. And finally, our country is studying the best options we have available to evaluate the advances on the UPR recommendations. That implies to define the characteristics of the indicators that really can be suitable for these purposes. Thank you very much for the invitation and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Iguiniz, and thank you very much for this presentation. What we take also from it is the issue of a national action plan, which is one of the many countries have taken this approach of developing a national action plan, which then make it easier also to implement UPR recommendation, and also the need again to work closely with the civil society. So our last panelist is Mr. Roland Chauville, who is the Executive Director of UPR Info, who will give us a 5-minute presentation on the role of NGOs in the preparation of the national report and the midterm reports. So.
Thank you, Sebastian. I had a PowerPoint, but it seems that it's not working, so I have to do without. Well, let me just start. Well, thank you very much for inviting me to be on this panel. And I'd like to take the opportunity to thank also the Foundation of Morocco and of the United Kingdom for organizing it, and also to all the permanent nations that were on the panel. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, so my name is Roland Chauville and I work for UPR Info, an NGO dedicated to the Universal Periodic Review process and to strengthen its work. I'd like to maybe start by the number of midterm reports. It was mentioned by Mr. Ndiaye from the OHCHR. We've had so far 52 midterm reports presented, 47 at the first cycle and 5 in the second cycle. So it's also important that states continue throughout the different cycles to present midterm reports. There's been a lot of challenges that have been mentioned by delegations on how to follow up, but also how to report on the UPR, and I'd like to highlight a few of them. First is the difficulty to report on a high number of recommendations. It has been mentioned. We are not so worried about the number of recommendations that states receive, but we understand that reporting on this can be challenging, and we'd like to highlight the best practices of certain states that have used annexes to their national report to list the recommendations and the implementation status in a table. It's also difficult to assess vague recommendations. It's been mentioned that it's difficult to implement vague recommendations, but it's also difficult to assess them. I'd like to recall that about 30% of recommendations only are considered specific, contain a specific action. So that leaves 70% of recommendations without a very concrete action to undertake. And also among the challenges, I would like to mention the challenges faced by civil society in their work at the national level, the lack of resources that civil society can face, and also the lack of coordinations or the difficulties to coordinate at the national level among civil society, and in certain areas as well to work with the government. As you know, civil society, and has been mentioned by panelists, civil society has a strong role to play in the follow-up as well, as it's been, as it is mentioned in Resolution 5.1 and been recalled in Resolution 1621 about the role of civil society in the implementation, and the fact that states are encouraged to to organize broad consultations with all relevant stakeholders. NGOs in that implementation have different roles to play. They can participate in the steering committee, and I was pleased to hear that notably in Mauritius, civil society are part of this human rights monitoring committee. NGOs can also obviously raise awareness about the UPR process and the need for the different actors to engage in it, and parliamentarians as well have a strong role to play in that. NGOs can publish midterm reports, and we're seeing more and more of that, and we encourage them. They also can take the floor on the Human Rights Council to provide oral updates. And they can also, which is maybe something that is not done so much, they can also update the recommending states in the different embassies about the progress made by the state under review to implement recommendations. Now I'd like to turn to a program that UPR Info has developed over the last 2 years that looks into the implementation of recommendations at midterm. We've started this program in 2011 by contacting the different stakeholders that have been engaged at the national level, so the government, civil society, the national institution, and the UN agencies. And we've asked them for information about the implementation at midterm, so 2.5 to 3 years after the review. And we've developed this program because there is no official follow-up mechanism or assessment conducted by the UN on the level of implementation. And we wanted to make sure that the voices of civil society working on the implementation could be had a relay at the United Nations. So looking at this program, we have some figures that comes out of it. We've looked into 165 countries, and we looked into 3 different levels of implementation: fully implemented, partially implemented, and not implemented. We've been able, thanks to the participation of those 4 stakeholders in those 165 countries, we were able to collect data on 11,000 recommendations, which represent 56% of the first cycle recommendations. And out of those 11,500 recommendations, we documented that 48% of those recommendations had triggered action by governments. So if we look at that into more detail, we see that out of those 11,500 recommendations, 18% were fully implemented, and 30% were partially implemented after 3 years after the review. So we will publish a study that will contain all this information I'm sharing with you. This study will be published at the end of October, and we will hold the side event during the 20th session of the UPR working group. And maybe I'll take some time again to respond to other information shared by panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chauville, for outlining the role of NGO and also the challenges of NGO in the process, and the need also, as many of our panelists have said, it's a partnership. So the need also to work very closely with the civil society in the preparation of the national report. Well, we have heard from all our panelists their experience of their respective countries in terms of preparation of national report, midterm report, but also implementation of the recommendations. And some of our panelists also have outlined the challenges in terms of the implementation of recommendations. We gather from the co-chair also it's not only a partnership at the national level, but it's also a partnership at the international level between developing countries. One point which was raised by UPR Info on the need to inform recommending states of the recommendations they have received at the UPR review of a country. There are many mechanisms, like, for example, under the Cotonou Agreement for ACP countries, you have the political dialogue, where these issues also can be raised by countries when EU countries and the country to which is signatory to the Cotonou Agreement also. They can have this kind of dialogues, and it also builds up on the issue of bilaterally on how, especially for many developing countries, on how to look on technical assistance and on issues where they have challenges in the implementation.